Welcome, brave souls, to another chilling tale from the Nightmare Maestro. Tonight, we set sail on a voyage of terror, where paradise becomes a prison and luxury turns to despair. What unseen horrors await us on the high seas? Prepare yourselves for a journey into the heart of isolation and fear as we embark on the quarantine cruise. The Mediterranean sun glinted off the sleek white hull of the Oceanic Dreamer as it waited in port, a floating palace promising a week of opulence and relaxation. Dr. Evelyn Marsh stood on the dock, her vacation suitcase in hand, watching fellow passengers stream up the gangway. Their excited chatter filled the air, a stark contrast to the unease gnawing at her gut. Evelyn shook off the feeling, chiding herself for being paranoid. She was here to escape the stress of the not to imagine new disasters. As she made her way onto the ship, she overheard snatches of conversation, families planning their first excursions, couples dreaming of romantic dinners, solo travelers eager to make new friends. The ship's interior was a marvel of engineering and design. Polished marble floors reflected the warm lighting, and the atrium soared several decks high, crowned by a stunning glass ceiling. Evelyn found herself swept along in the tide of new arrivals, all being herded towards their muster stations for the mandatory safety briefing. As she settled into her seat, Evelyn noticed a man a few rows ahead coughing into his sleeve. It was probably nothing, just a leftover cold or reaction to the sea air. But something about the wet, hacking sound made her skin crawl. The safety presentation began, the cheerful voice of the crew member detailing evacuation procedures, a jarring counterpoint to Evelyn's growing sense of foreboding. Little did any of them know, as they nodded along to instructions about life jackets and escape routes, that a far more insidious danger was already among them, one that no amount of safety drills could prepare them for. 2 days into the cruise, and Evelyn found herself reluctantly enjoying the experience. The constant activity and sumptuous meals had pushed her earlier concerns to the back of her mind. She lounged by the pool, sipping a fruity cocktail and watching fellow passengers splash and play. A commotion near the bar caught her attention. A middle-aged woman had collapsed, her drink shattering on the deck. Evelyn's instincts kicked in, and she rushed to help. The woman's skin was clammy, her breathing labored. As Evelyn checked her vital signs, she noticed angry red welts spreading across the woman's arms. Ship's medical staff arrived quickly, whisking the woman away on a stretcher. Evelyn couldn't shake the image of those welts from her mind. They didn't match any common ailment she could think of. As she returned to her lounger, she overheard worried whispers from nearby passengers. Throughout the day, similar incidents occurred. A teenager vomiting uncontrollably in the dining room. An elderly man complaining of blinding headaches and sensitivity to light. Each time, the ship's crew acted swiftly, removing the affected individuals from public areas. That evening, as Evelyn made her way to dinner, she noticed fewer people in the corridors. The usual lively atmosphere had been replaced by a tense quiet. In the restaurant, nearly half the tables stood empty. Those who were eating kept casting nervous glances around the room, as if expecting someone else to suddenly fall ill. Evelyn picked at her food, her appetite gone. She couldn't help but feel that something was very wrong on this ship. And as a doctor, she felt a responsibility to find out what it was. Little did she know, her investigation would lead her into the heart of a nightmare from which there might be no escape. The following morning, Evelyn woke to an eerie silence. Gone were the usual sounds of laughter and music that had filled the ship. She dressed quickly and left her cabin, determined to get answers. The corridors were deserted, save for the occasional crew member hurrying past, their faces tight with worry. As she approached the medical bay, Evelyn heard raised voices. She recognized one as belonging to the ship's doctor, Dr. Ramirez. Peering through the door's small window, she saw chaos. Every bed was occupied, and makeshift cots lined the walls. Patients writhed in pain, their skin covered in the same angry welts she'd seen before. Dr. Ramirez emerged, his face haggard. When he saw Evelyn, relief flashed in his eyes. "Dr. Marsh, we could use your help." Without hesitation, Evelyn entered the medical bay, the antiseptic smell unable to mask the underlying stench of sickness and fear. As she donned protective gear, Dr. Ramirez briefed her on the situation. Over 100 passengers and crew had fallen ill with similar symptoms: fever, vomiting, painful skin lesions, and in some cases, hallucinations. The ship's limited medical supplies were already running low. Evelyn spent hours examining patients, each case more disturbing than the last. The illness seemed to progress rapidly, with no clear pattern of transmission. As she worked, she overheard snippets of frantic radio communications between the ship and mainland authorities. Words like quarantine and unknown pathogen sent chills down her spine. By nightfall, the medical bay was overflowing. Evelyn and Dr. Ramirez made the difficult decision to convert one of the ship's lounges into an auxiliary ward. As they moved patients, Evelyn couldn't help but notice the fear in the eyes of the healthy passengers they passed. Everyone knew that this was no ordinary outbreak. In the quiet moments between emergencies, Evelyn's mind raced. What could cause such rapid and widespread infection? And more importantly, how could they stop it before it was too late? Day 5 of the cruise, and the Oceanic Dreamer had become a floating prison. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing a mandatory quarantine. All passengers were to remain in their cabins until further notice. Meals would be delivered, and any signs of illness were to be reported immediately. Evelyn paced her small cabin, feeling helpless. She had been relieved of her volunteer duties in the medical bay, deemed too valuable as one of the few remaining healthy individuals. The isolation was maddening. Through the walls, she could hear muffled sobs and angry shouting from neighboring cabins. Her tablet provided a tenuous connection to the outside world, but the news was grim. Footage showed naval vessels surrounding the cruise ship, preventing any attempt to dock or evacuate. The world watched in horrified fascination as the drama unfolded, with wild theories spreading faster than the disease itself. Evelyn's thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at her door. Peering through the peephole, she saw a young crew member, his eyes wide with fear. Against her better judgment, she cracked the door open. The man thrust a crumpled note into her hand before darting away. With trembling fingers, Evelyn unfolded the paper. It contained a hastily scrawled message. "Not all is as it seems. Meet me in the engine room at midnight. Trust no one." The note was signed simply K. As night fell, Evelyn wrestled with her conscience. Leaving her cabin would be a violation of quarantine, potentially putting others at risk. But if there was any chance of uncovering the truth about this outbreak, she had to take it. At 5 minutes to midnight, Evelyn slipped out of her cabin. The corridors were eerily silent, the emergency lighting casting long shadows. Every creak of the ship made her jump. As she descended into the bowels of the vessel, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking into a trap. But what choice did she have? The engine room door loomed before her, heavy and foreboding. With a deep breath, Evelyn pushed it open, stepping into the unknown. What secrets would she uncover in the depths of this nightmare cruise? And would the truth be even more terrifying than the disease itself? The engine room hummed with barely contained power, the massive machinery casting strange shadows in the dim light. Evelyn's heart raced as she scanned the area for any sign of her mysterious contact. A movement caught her eye, and she turned to see a figure emerge from behind a bulkhead. "Dr. Marsh, I'm Kai, ship's engineer," the man said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for coming. We don't have much time." He gestured for Evelyn to follow him deeper into the maze of pipes and equipment. As they walked, Kai explained in hushed tones. He had noticed discrepancies in the ship's maintenance logs, areas of the vessel that were suddenly off limits even to senior crew. But it was only when he overheard a late-night conversation between the captain and a group of men in suits that he realized the terrifying truth. They reached a sealed hatch, and Kai produced a keycard. "What I'm about to show you, it could get us both killed, but people need to know." The hatch swung open, revealing a hidden laboratory. Evelyn gasped as she took in the sight. Rows of cages lined the walls, filled with various animals in varying states of distress. Computers displayed complex molecular structures, and vials of colorful liquids sat in carefully labeled racks. "They've been using this cruise as a testing ground," Kai said, his voice shaking. "Some kind of biological weapon. The outbreak, it's all been carefully orchestrated." As the full horror of the situation dawned on Evelyn, alarms began to blare throughout the ship. A voice over the intercom announced a containment breach and ordered all personnel to emergency stations. Kai's eyes widened in panic. "We have to get out of here. They'll be coming to secure the lab." But as they turned to flee, the hatch slammed shut. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the engine room. Trapped in the heart of a floating nightmare, Evelyn and Kai exchanged terrified glances. They had uncovered the truth, but at what cost? And with the disease still spreading, was there any hope of escape? Or had they simply traded one form of quarantine for another, even more deadly? Thank you for the confirmation. I'll now proceed with the final 2 scenes of The Quarantine Cruise, aiming for approximately 800 additional words. Here are the remaining scenes. The laboratory door burst open, flooding the room with harsh light. 4 men in hazmat suits rushed in, their faceplates obscuring any hint of humanity. Evelyn and Kai pressed themselves against the far wall, trapped like the very lab animals surrounding them. "Step away from the equipment," one of the men ordered, his voice distorted by his suit's speaker. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." Evelyn's mind raced, searching for a way out of this nightmare. Her eyes landed on a rack of vials near her elbow. Without thinking, she grabbed one and held it high. "Stay back, or I'll smash this," she threatened, her voice steadier than she felt. The lead hazmat figure paused, then chuckled mirthlessly. "Do you even know what you're holding, Doctor?" He took a step forward, his reflective faceplate revealing Evelyn's own terrified expression. "That's the cure." The words hit Evelyn like a physical blow. She glanced at the vial in her trembling hand, its pale blue contents suddenly the most precious thing in the world. "Cure? You mean you've had this all along?" Rage began to replace her fear. "People are dying up there." "Acceptable losses," another hazmat figure interjected coldly. "We needed a real-world test environment. You can't imagine the potential of what we've created here." As they spoke, Kai had been inching towards a computer terminal. With a sudden lunge, he slammed his hand down on a large red button. Klaxons blared to life, and a mechanical voice announced, "Biohazard containment protocol initiated. All personnel evacuate immediately." Chaos erupted. The hazmat team turned, shouting contradictory orders. Evelyn seized the moment, clutching the precious vial to her chest and bolting for the door. Kai was right behind her, pausing only to grab a handful of data drives from a nearby workstation. They raced through the bowels of the ship, the sound of pursuit echoing off metal walls. Evelyn's lungs burned, but terror and adrenaline pushed her forward. They burst into a service corridor, and Kai pulled her into a maintenance shaft barely wider than their bodies. As they shimmed upwards, the ship lurched violently. The containment protocol was sealing off sections of the vessel, irreparably damaging its structure. They emerged onto the main deck to a scene of pandemonium. Passengers and crew scrambled for lifeboats, the quarantine forgotten in the face of this new threat. Evelyn clutched the vial, her mind whirling. They had the cure, but with the ship breaking apart around them, would they live long enough to share it with the world? Dawn broke over a churning sea, painting the sky in hues of flame. The Oceanic Dreamer listed badly, smoke billowing from its lower decks. Scattered lifeboats bobbed in the water, flares arcing into the air as Coast Guard vessels approached. Evelyn and Kai clung to a piece of floating debris, the precious vial and data drives secured in a waterproof bag between them. They watched in exhausted silence as rescue operations began, the magnitude of what they'd uncovered still sinking in. As a Coast Guard cutter drew near, Evelyn turned to Kai. "We can't let them cover this up," she said, her voice hoarse from smoke and seawater. "The world needs to know the truth." Kai nodded grimly. "I grabbed every file I could. With that and the physical sample, they won't be able to deny it." He paused, meeting Evelyn's eyes. "But we'll be targets. The people behind this, they won't stop until they silence us." Evelyn thought of her life before the cruise, the safety and routine of her hospital job, the simple pleasures she'd taken for granted. All of that was gone now. But as she looked at the vial, glinting in the early morning light, she knew there was no going back. As they were pulled aboard the rescue vessel, Evelyn and Kai exchanged a silent vow. They would expose the truth, whatever the cost. The nightmare of the quarantine cruise was over, but their real journey, one of danger, persecution, and the fight for justice, was just beginning. Wrapped in emergency blankets, they watched the Oceanic Dreamer slip beneath the waves. With it went the evidence of unimaginable cruelty and the lives of those who couldn't be saved. But in Evelyn's hand, she held the key to redemption, a cure born from suffering that might yet bring hope to millions. The Coast Guard ship turned toward shore, carrying them into an uncertain future. Evelyn knew that powerful forces would seek to silence them, to bury the truth along with a doomed cruise ship. But she also knew that some stories refuse to die, some truths demand to be told. As the sun climbed higher, burning away the last wisps of fog, Evelyn made a silent promise to every soul lost on that floating nightmare. Their sacrifice would not be in vain. The world would know the truth of the quarantine cruise, and those responsible would face a reckoning. Subscribe for more chilling tales from the Nightmare Maestro.